in a lot of the literature around embodied knowledge, particularly that comes out of various parts of the knowledge management industry, there's what I see as kind of an elision between a number of terms, which is slightly pragmatically useful, but I think it's a little bit confusing in some other ways. And I'm thinking particularly of the term tacit knowledge and procedural knowledge. What I find quite interesting about that, not confusion, but that blending of those two terms, is that what I see there is those two words and the two types of knowledge, the two responses to knowledge that they represent. I see them as coming out of the same overall knowledge paradigm, which, as I've said before, is a metaphorical image schema to do with embodied experience in space. And each of those terms, I think, focuses on, or maybe draws attention to, slightly different entailments of that overall paradigm. Both of them aren't to do with explicit knowledge, neither of them are to do with objects of knowledge at the end of some sort of unfurling path or anything like that exactly. They both have some sort of relationship to embodiment, but they are different. And I think the difference is revealing. Procedural knowledge, which is sometimes called know-how, is, well, I think the metaphor that it draws on is the metaphor that I'm kind of enacting right now, which is walking along a particular path with the intention of arriving at a pre-established and predetermined goal. This is my procedure, and my procedure in this case will take me home. And whilst I'm not thinking about home, well, that's not part of the procedural knowledge I'm engaged in right now. It does nevertheless figure as part of the overall, as one of the entailments, albeit one that's ignored for this purpose. So if that's the sort of kinesthetic embodied action on which procedural knowledge is modelled, and I think it is, then let's see where that goes. Other versions of procedural knowledge, or other metaphorical extensions of that, and applications indeed, are things like craft-based activities, the making of something. So learning how to make a chair is the acquisition of procedural knowledge. And once you've acquired that procedural knowledge, then you can go through the steps, you can take the steps, as I'm taking the steps now, and arrive at the goal, which is the construction of the chair. In other words, the acquisition of procedural knowledge is the laying down of the path that procedure takes. It's the establishment of those steps that lead from where you are to where the object of your intentions lies. That's what I see as procedural knowledge. It demands a particular sort of relationship to an object and to a way of getting to that object, a way of doing something. And that object might be literal in the case of a chair, but also it might also be a metaphorical object in the sense that it might be a sort of procedure by which one might arrive at a conclusion in an argument or in a sort of logical deductive procedure, or maybe even a procedure to do with well, writing an essay perhaps, or writing a poem even, possibly. Well, I think we're right on the edge of stretching the metaphor to breaking there. But nevertheless, there's still that sense that what we're looking at when we're talking about procedural knowledge is a path to a goal from a source. And the acquisition of procedural knowledge is the familiarization of oneself with that path. That's very different, as I understand it, from tacit knowledge. And here I'm reminded again that tacit is not synonymous with implicit, for example. It's not. There's not a sense within the word tacit or an understanding of Lange's understanding of tacit that it's a kind of folded up set of knowledge ideas that one can unfold later. It's not that understanding. It's not the opposite of explicit. it's a completely different part of the paradigm, a completely different entailment, an entailment which is detached from the procedure of the process of unrolling, or the process of journeying from where you are to where you want to be. Tacit comes from words meaning silent. It's dispositional. There's a sense of waiting and suspension and holding. There's also a sort of, at least this is how I experience it, a kind of darkness within it. Not a foreboding kind of darkness, but a darkness of fecundity and potential. It's that kind of dazzling darkness that you imagine is underneath the soil, that kind of darkness. And so the tacit, the silence, that kind of silent knowledge isn't going anywhere. It's not part of that process at all. It's much more akin to what David Perkins calls proactive knowledge, which is a kind of, well, he talks about proactive knowledge as being dispositional. It's part of an attribute of being. It's part of a sort of, I hate to use the word energy, but it's a kind of, there's a sense in both the tacit and the proactive that it's a sort of potential, if you like. It's a subsidiary, a dynamic subsidiary to what will eventually, to what could be made explicit, possibly, or which could proceed, possibly. So those two terms, the procedural and the tacit, although they come from a relatively small division within the whole spread of knowledge, to the extent that they're often used synonymously, I think draw very different attention to the different parts of the overall model. And just so I can just stay on that for one moment longer, the other term that Perkins uses, which is performative knowledge, which he says lies between this proactive, dispositional knowledge and the kind of objective knowledge that he refers to as possessive. That performative knowledge is something slightly different again. If I was to distinguish that from procedural knowledge and tacit knowledge, I would have to say that in the sense that procedural knowledge is the learning of a pre-established path, performative knowledge is the first step out of the darkness of the tacit into the light of the space across which paths are forged. It's that there's a sense in which between performing knowledge or performative knowledge, it doesn't have a goal in mind. At least that's the way I'm understanding it. There's not a sense in which you know the route that you're going to take, and you know how to get there, and you know what you will end up with when you get there. To the extent that performative is truly performative, it hasn't got that in mind. It is as I say, the step onto the stage of the process of knowing. It's that I can't go any further with that. I'm just reminded of, well, I'd say what I'm reminded of is a sticker that my wife put on my door, on the bedroom door, and it says, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single coffee. It's kind of that. It's like the first cup of coffee. Performative knowledge is reaching out with your hand in the hope that your wife has put a cup of coffee on the bedside table for you.